Warning: the following contains content where hundreds of divines are used. The content is meant to be informational and consists of best practices for crafting perfect items in Path of Exile 2. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to talk about how you can craft a perfect item. We will discuss the use of high value omens, cost analysis on whether or not it's worth it using these omens, best and realistic expectations, and the different routes you can take when crafting an item. To start, let's define what a perfect item means in Path of Exile 2. A perfect item is one that has tier 1 rolls on every modifier, with all of those modifiers working together to support the same build. In other words, the modifiers should synergize with each other and collectively provide the maximum possible benefit for a single build archetype. For example, a ring that has flat maximum mana isn't a perfect item if it has tier 1 flat lightning damage to attacks, even though they're both tier 1 modifiers, because mana typically benefits spellcaster builds while the lightning damage to attacks is for attacks. However, something like flat maximum mana along with increased maximum mana would be considered a perfect item if it had things like tier 1 resistances and rarity in the suffixes. Now that we know what a perfect item is, the first step is to decide what item we want to craft along with which modifiers we will be targeting. For you, that may be following a build guide and you want to craft those boots the creator is using, or maybe you're checking PoE Ninja and see some cool gloves you've never seen before, so you're wondering what's the best route to take to craft those. For this example, I will be using gloves because I think it will make a great example of all of the different possibilities. In the runes of Alder League, there are new runes that when socketed, they allow you to get new modifiers that are not achievable any other way. Once the rune is socketed, you cannot remove the rune and they are permanently bound. For gloves, that's using the Call rune, allowing you to get marksman modifiers. I'm not sure if I pronounced the name right, but it is what it is and that's the best I'm going to do. Each piece of armor has its own specific rune and modifiers, so check PoE2 database or Craft of Exile if you are crafting an item that needs those specific modifiers. If you're crafting an item that doesn't need these special modifiers, the process is the same, but I wanted to showcase these runes to cover all of my grounds. Once you've decided what item you want, you can perform a whole cost analysis prior to purchasing the item and crafting it if your goal is to profit craft, as well as determining your expected cost of the craft. My last video went over all of this, so I won't go too in depth, but I wanted to include it as you should make a habit of it when crafting. I'll leave my previous video in the description if you missed it. For this video, I want gloves with projectile skills, projectile damage, and projectile speed. I want them for a new spellcaster build I'll be creating, and there will be a video released in the coming weeks. However, it's important to note that gloves of this nature are strong on multiple builds with different tier 1 modifiers. For example, projectile skills along with maximum mana is best in slot on caster builds like Spark or Arc since they have the projectile tag. It's also best in slot on twister builds like Abyssal Lich since damage to attacks benefits them really well. You may be asking yourself, why am I bringing up 2 builds for one craft and I haven't even started yet? Well, it's because most items you craft will have multiple different combinations that are valuable with some of those modifiers overlapping. Therefore, it's important for me to know all of these modifiers that are valuable because I can stop at certain points and sell my item instead of, say, removing a good modifier to get the exact combination that I want for my own build. For example, if I happen to get tier 1 maximum mana along with projectile skills and projectile speed, I don't want to Omen of Whittle or remove the mana simply because I want twister gloves. I can just sell the mana gloves, save my materials, and either do a new craft with new gloves or buy new ones with the currency I got from the sale. If I was to just remove this maximum mana, I could be wasting currency instead of making currency. If you're playing SSF, this part doesn't really apply to you, but you're probably used to settling anyways, so it shouldn't come as a surprise to settle for what you get, in a sense. The second step is to determine the item level of the base you want. I've expressed this in previous videos, but the item level does matter quite a lot when you are crafting several items. An item must be a certain item level to get specific tier 1 modifiers. For what we want, item level 75 is the minimum since we need that for projectile damage. A lot of newer players learn about item level and immediately think any item level above 82 is fine and dandy. However, that's not always the case. For these gloves, I do not want an item level 82 because that means I can get tier 1 modifiers for elemental resistances, and this increases the total pool of modifiers whenever I use one of my currencies. Simply put, it lowers my chances of getting my wanted modifiers like projectile skills since I have the option of getting more modifiers from the tier 1 elemental resistances, meaning I will expect to spend more currency versus just buying a lower item level base and saving currency. Of course, the probabilities aren't that much better, but I've said this multiple times on this channel now and should start it as a slogan basically, but if you're producing items at a mass, every percent matters, saving you currency and boosting profits. In lower budget crafts, it's not a big deal because it's only a couple of divines or maybe a couple of chaos orbs. But what I'll be showing in this video, rerolls can cost you up to 25 divines per roll of changing one modifier when combining certain high value omens, and those percentage points really start to matter. Obviously, these high value omens are quite expensive, but cool shit ain't cheap, and cheap shit ain't cool, so that's just how it goes. Now back to my gloves. Ideally, item level 75 would be the best because then I can't get these modifiers, so basically my item can never be bricked at any point where I can't just Omen of Whittle, and that may sound confusing to you, but don't worry, I'll explain it when we get to the actual craft. There's really not that many item level 75 exceptional gloves on the market, and the ones that are extremely expensive, but you can snipe good bases early league for cheaper, and maybe you're not using exceptional bases, so item level 75 would be the best. For me, anywhere between 75 to 80 will be fine. Additionally, I'm going to be picking up Energy Shield Exceptional Gloves. These are the most expensive, but they're what's best in slot on those caster and twister builds like we talked about earlier. A side note here is that there are different bases with the same stats. What I mean is there are several different Energy Shield gloves and each has a different base value of Energy Shield. We can see these gloves here are super cheap, but if I look up Siren Scale gloves, these are super expensive because these have the highest Energy Shield base. The only real difference is literally a few energy shield. In terms of margin, it depends on what you're crafting and whether or not you should get the maximum defensive roll base. If you don't plan on using any high value omens and want to minimize your risk, which is ideal for newer and beginner crafters, I'd recommend one of the middle ground bases. Normally, I'd pick up these and craft on them, but this is a perfect item video, so we will be buying the Siren Scale gloves. For gloves, it doesn't really matter as much since I'm not trying to get increases to energy shield, but things on like body armor or boots can matter quite a bit because it can let you hit new thresholds for that energy shield or those defensive rolls. Of course, you do not have to start at the normal level and can start at a fractured base or a magic level base and buy them off of the market. But this leads me into step number 3, and it's to quality the item first before doing any crafting on it using temple currency. Temple currency like Val infusers are the ones for armor, and these currencies work exactly like armorer scraps, allowing you to quality over 20% with a chance of corrupting the item. For gloves, it's honestly not that important since we're not going for any increases in energy shield. However, this can be extremely important on other items like boots, helmets, or chest pieces because that extra quality can help you reach new defensive thresholds like maybe hitting 600 energy shield on your helmets. This is also the reason why I don't recommend the expensive bases because if you corrupt your item, you lost all that money for a minuscule amount of defenses. In this instance, it's only like 6 or so energy shield. As for the probabilities of corruption when using a Val infuser, infusers have a 5% chance to corrupt per quality, with the first Val infuser being guaranteed to not corrupt. This means your first Val infuser will never corrupt the item, and using a Val infuser on a 23% quality item would have a 15% chance of corrupting. A 26% quality item has a 30% chance of corrupting, and so on, with 30% on the item being the maximum quality. Additionally, each infuser has a 20% chance to add 2 quality, so every 1 out of 5 Val infusers you use will increase the quality by 2% instead of 1. The chance of you getting to 30% without corrupting is roughly between 11 and 12%. You'll have an expected cost of roughly 9 bases and around 50 to 60 Val infusers if you don't get unlucky. I won't go into any more detail regarding that, and the community has found this information. It's already been proven, but you can search up that information for yourself if you are curious. I just wanted to provide you the facts because you can also make money Val infusing and selling these white infused bases. For my gloves, I'm just going to go to 23% since it doesn't really matter that much on gloves and I don't really want to lose all of the currency I just spent on this base. Once you've qualityed your item, the 4th step is to decide how you want to craft this item. You'll also want to input the crafting rune if you are using it now. You may have already decided how you want to craft this item because you bought a fractured base or maybe you bought something at the magic level. I'm going to input my Color Rune now, but there's 2 main routes you can take when crafting. One being an Orb of Annulment spam at the magic level, and the other relying on a fracturing a rare item and then chaos spamming, which I think most people are familiar with. Both are expensive either way you look at it, but Orb of Annulment and Augmentation spamming is the more deterministic of the 2. I went over chaos spamming in my last video, so let's do Orb of Annulment spamming, plus it's also really ideal when you're trying to make perfect items. Ideally, I want +2 projectile skills and either projectile speed or projectile damage as my prefix when the item is at the magic level. Now, the main reason I wanted to showcase this new rune is because you will see on PoE2 database or Craft of Exile that there's no weighting numbers for these mods. However, these mods are still weighted. More than likely, +2 projectile skills has a 500 or 250 weighting similar to melee skills. The reason the website is not updated is because GGG removed the Recombinator this patch, and this was the main way for weightings to be definitively determined. With that being said, I can still calculate a rough estimation on the amount of annulment orbs it will take me to get +2 projectile skills. Although they just show the number 1 next to them for each of their weightings, we could say that the total weighting of the suffixes for these ones here are roughly 4,000 or 5,000, and for the prefixes we'll say they're about 3,000. So let's say the weighting of +2 projectile skills is 250. If I input my item level here and then select Perfect Orb of Augmentation, it will update all of the probabilities, and that means with each Perfect Orb of Augmentation along with the very first Orb of Transmutation, I have a chance of 250 divided by 13,200, which is the suffixes, and 6,200, which is the prefixes. And then 3,000 for our prefixes that we do not know. This is a guesstimation, along with another 4,000 for those other suffixes of marksman modifiers, which we do not know as well, which is a guesstimation. I'll put all of the math on the screen for my visual people. 1 divided by this probability means it will take roughly 105 orbs of annulment and augmentation orbs. Now, this is not definitive because we do not know the weightings of these Call Runes modifiers, but it's always better to expect to spend more than less, so I do think I overestimated a little bit here, which is good. So now we just Orb of Annulment and Augmentation spam until we get the modifiers we want. The goal is to have 2 good modifiers like projectile damage along with +2 projectile skills. If you only get +2 projectile skills, you can technically use an Omen of Sinistral Annulment here and then keep adding the Augmentation orbs. This will make it to where you only remove the prefix until you eventually get a good modifier that you want. From there, it would take roughly 10 annulments to get something like projectile damage. My advice is to just keep Annul spamming until you get a decent prefix, even if you accidentally remove the +2 projectile skills. It may take a little bit more time, but it is a lot cheaper to do so because each Omen of Sinistral Annulment is like 16 divines at this point, so it's super expensive. Any of the tier 1 flats is okay, and so is maximum mana in the prefix slot, but you definitely want to have that +2 projectile skills. For those of you that have made it this far, just a reminder to make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you aren't already. It really encourages me to make these informational videos for you guys and continue to do it. If I missed anything or confused you at any point, please feel free to leave a comment. Both positive and negative comments are welcome. I really do appreciate any criticism you guys give. Alright, back to the video. Alright, cool, we got it with a decent prefix as well. Once you've completed your spam or purchased the item at the magic level, the next step is to add an essence. For perfect items, Greater Essence of Opulence is the best and really the only one because it gives tier 1 rarity, meaning your item will still be considered a perfect item. If you are not wanting tier 1 rarity or it's something like a body armor, you just have to use a perfect regal orb and hope you hit something good. Our item is at the rare level now and we have 3 really good modifiers, and the route you can take now is up to you. I don't have to use a fracturing orb at this point, but if I happen to fracture the prefix, my craft is pretty much complete and is deterministic. The main reason we wanted 2 good modifiers at the magic level is because our fracturing orb at this point can only help us, and the item can't be bricked even if we miss in a sense. Now you may be thinking +2 projectile skills is what you want. Ideally we want to fracture the prefix of maximum mana, or rarity. Maximum mana is the best because our craft becomes completely deterministic. Rarity is the next best because rarity has a low modifier level, and if it's fractured, I can't Omen of Whittle it off. Now, that may sound confusing if you're new, so I will get a second pair of gloves and show both processes depending on my fracture and so I can explain it better to you. If our fracturing orb happens to hit +2 projectile skills, we're kind of shit out of luck, but we can still continue the craft, but we basically just lost the currency of that fracturing orb because it doesn't really help us. So before fracturing, the first thing you want to do is desecrate to increase your odds. Desecrating a prefix or a suffix really just depends on what item you're crafting as well as the route you're taking. A majority of the time, I like to desecrate the prefix, and for this one, desecrating the prefix will be the best scenario. The more things you craft, the more you'll know on whether or not you should desecrate a prefix or a suffix. So I'm just going to desecrate the prefix. Now from here, I'm going to want to divine orb up this maximum mana, so I'm going to get some divine orbs. So I've got some divine orbs now, and we're going to want to get that maximum mana up to 124 if we can. Alright, so we got 124. Unfortunately, the rarity is low rolled, but that's okay. Now we're just going to fracture the item and hopefully it hits maximum mana. So it hit the +2 projectile skills, which is not ideal. Unfortunate. We had a 2 out of 3 chance, but I can still show you how to complete this craft, and I'll also show another one as if I had fractured the prefix. So I picked up 2 other glove bases, and those are the other 2 fractures that could have happened, and I'll show those after I get through these next 2 steps. From here, since we fractured +2 projectile skills, we're going to want to add an Essence of Horror to increase the effect of socketed augment items. If I would have fractured the prefix, I could have just easily added an Exalt and then removed it and not have to worry about accidentally removing something. Now I just kind of have to play it by chance and hopefully I don't remove the maximum mana. So I'm just going to get a Perfected Exalt Orb and then Perfected Exalt this item with a prefix. So we can see that I have the Desecrated Prefix modifier along with maximum mana, and then there's still an open suffix. So I'm going to activate the Omen of Sinistral Exaltation, and then I'm going to use a Perfected Exalted Orb. However, you can definitely use a Greater Exalted Orb here if you would like. And we got tier 1 increased energy shield. Not the worst, but not the best. But now from here, this is where we're going to activate the Omen of Sinistral Crystallization and then use our Essence of Horror. This will give us the increased effect of socketed augment items, and hopefully it does not remove the maximum mana. But you can see that when I first activate it and try to put it on this gloves, it does not allow me because I already have one crafted modifier. But if you use the Astrid's Creativity Rune, which came with the runes of Older League, you can have one additional crafted modifier. So we can socket that in, and now I'm able to use the essence on these gloves. And hopefully it doesn't remove the maximum mana, preferably the energy shield. And it did remove the energy shield, so that is the most ideal. Now from here, I would just reveal at the Well of Souls and then add another Perfected Exalt and hopefully hit something like projectile damage or projectile speed. But let's take a look at these other gloves. So these gloves already have the increased effect of socketed augment items, and they hit the prefix fracture of increased projectile damage. And we can see that I already have the T1 physical damage, which is kind of good, but we'll show why it's deterministic for getting this prefix fracture. So because I already used the Essence of Horror on this item and my suffixes are complete, now I could just activate the Omen of Sinistral Erasure and then use a Perfected Chaos Orb, and we can see that it will remove that prefix. So I could just keep doing this until I get the modifier that I want, and then Desecrate for my final prefix and Omen of Light spam, guaranteeing me a perfect item. So we'll just hit it with 1. So we got T2 maximum mana, and I could settle here, and my recommendation is to settle here because these are quite expensive. You really don't want to just keep spamming these and spamming these. Of course, you can for certain items, and it's best to do these on things like weapons because mirror items are super expensive, which is why people charge mirror fees. But you really don't want to be using a lot of these high value omens unless the sales are for tons and tons of currency. For example, if these sell for thousands of divines, great. But if not, I can get to the same point in the craft for roughly 100 divines, and each one of these erasures is 20 divines a pop. So 5 rerolls is already 100 divines. I could just get a whole new pair of gloves and start over and sell these ones and make some currency off of that. But T2 maximum mana is totally fine for me. So now I'm just going to desecrate. Alright, so we're just going to desecrate the Ancient Rib. And now I'll just go to the Well of Souls, and then I will reveal until I get the modifier I want, along with using the Omen of Light spam. Alright, make sure you have those Omen of Abyssal Echoes activated. And that's not what we want, so we're going to reroll. And we're looking for projectile speed, and we got it on the first one, so that's great. So we basically have perfectly rolled ones, other than that T2 maximum mana, because we did settle. Now I know I'll get some hate for not crafting an actual perfect item, because this is a perfect item video, but I just wanted to stress that it is important for you to settle. You can start to burn tons and tons of currency using these high value omens, and you will lose currency quickly instead of actually profiting or saving currency for making your own items. For these other 2 bases, normally I would either just slam them and whatever I get is whatever I get, or I would just sell the fractured bases on the market and try to make some currency back. But normally I would not continue and use all of these different high value omens. I just wanted to showcase all of the different high value omens for any newer players. Now I know it may seem like this is what you need to do when crafting when you watch this next segment. However, that's not always the case. These projectile gloves don't really sell that well anymore since we're late league. But do want to stress it before we get into it. This is future me editing, and I didn't really think it was stressed enough, so this is me stressing it now. So for this one, all you have to do is add a Perfected Exalt, and hopefully you get something good. If you don't, it is what it is. We got T2 lightning damage to attacks, totally fine. So now we would just reveal at the Well of Souls, and whatever we get is whatever we get. I wouldn't continue with it because we didn't get the fracture that we would like. You could also just sell the +2 projectile skills because there's a lot of players that just don't know any better. They think +2 projectiles being fractured is the best. Now for this one, it is a completely different one. I did have to make an edit because I forgot to hit the record button, but we have the increased rarity of items found already fractured. We can see that it has the Desecrated revealed for maximum energy shield, and we have the maximum life. I bought these off of the market for roughly 50 divines, and they were definitely going for the fracture of projectile skills. So I've already added the Astrid's creativity to this item, giving me the additional crafted modifier. Now I'm not going to want to add the increased effect of socketed augment items. So for example, the increased effect of socketed augment items here, which is what we used, the Essence of Horror, which is great. However, it has a modifier level of 1, meaning that whenever I use the Omen of Whittling, means my Chaos Orb will remove the lowest level modifier. That means that this increased effect of socketed augment items will always be removed, and is a common mistake a lot of newer crafters make. For this one, I'm actually just going to add the Essence of Hysteria. This will give my item increased critical damage bonus, and hopefully we remove the Desecrated or the maximum life. We're guaranteed to remove one of them. It doesn't really matter because we have the Omen of Sinistral Crystallization active, and this will give us increased critical damage bonus. Now from here, because we have T1 maximum life, if we activate the Omen of Whittling and hover over it, we can see that it's going to get the increased critical damage bonus because critical damage bonus is not tier 1, which is quite unfortunate. Now you could gamble here and remove it, and hopefully it adds a prefix. However, the safe bet is to use that same Omen we just used, Sinistral Erasure, to use a Chaos Orb to change the maximum life into something else. So now we're just going to use the Omen of Sinistral Eraser. We hit tier 3 maximum mana, which is not ideal. It is what it is. And I'm just going to hit it again until I get a decent modifier. Tier 2 increased projectile damage isn't the greatest, but it's not the worst. Let's pull up PoE 2 DB just to see what modifier level that is. So if we go to PoE 2 DB, tier 2 increased projectile damage has a pretty good item modifier level of 65, so I don't see a reason why we can't keep it. So now the next step is to use a Perfected Exalted Orb and hopefully add either a flat or projectile speed. We got tier 4 cold damage to attacks. Now, tier 4 cold damage to attacks isn't that low of a modifier level, but I don't know if it's lower or higher than increased critical damage bonus off the top of my head since it is T2. So let's activate the Omen of Whittling, and we can see that it's not. Now, this is where you would have to combine, and then it would remove the tier 4 cold damage to attacks. But again, you have to take into consideration, is it really worth it? I combine these two omens, that's 35 divines a reroll. I don't really think it's worth it because these gloves are probably going to sell for a couple hundred divines maximum. So from this point forward, you would just desecrate and then reveal at the Well of Souls. Whatever you get is whatever you get. You can just always go start over once you sell these ones and then just do another gloves once you get them done. Alright, so we're at the Well of Souls. Make sure you have your Omen of Abyssal Echoes activated, and let's throw them in and hopefully we get something good. That's pretty good. That's I think a T1. I'll take a T1 lightning damage to attacks. That's not bad. Yep, so T1 lightning damage to attacks. That's great. And then hopefully we can get some other sort of flat. Unfortunate, we didn't get anything really good on this one. I'm just going to take the maximum energy shield. Now from this point forward, you still have that rune that says can have one additional crafted modifier. These ones I had already showcased that I have the increased attack speed, but to override this, you would literally just put in the rune and the additional crafted modifier will stay no matter what, no matter if it's fractured or not. So I'm just going to put it on both of these, even though it's not really ideal. These ones aren't going to really sell for anything. I can definitely Omen of Light and hopefully get something better, but let's just add the rune really quick. So I've got two Idols of Sirius. I'm just going to put them both in now. and we can see that those crafted modifiers are staying even though I replaced that rune. So using one of these Astra Creativities can give you an additional crafted modifier. I think these are worth about 4 to 5 divines, but they can help you deterministically craft items and make super strong items. That's pretty much it for the video. I don't want to extend it any further. We got 1 gloves that were super good. We've got that everything is perfect. The next step will be to corrupt these because they have the effect of socketed augment items, and the same thing would go for this one as well, but these other 2 aren't really the best. In terms of cost analysis, these aren't really the best right now to be crafting because I think someone else made a video on them, or possibly a streamer was showcasing these, because these don't really sell for that much anymore and there's a quite abundant amount of them on the market. So it's honestly better to just purchase some, unless you happen to get something like this and then hit the extra socket. They can sell for over 1,000 divines. Now, although I was using things for the prefixes, for the Omen of Sinistral Erasures, you can do the same thing in the suffixes. It just depends on what item you're crafting. And if you ever want to just remove an item based off of the suffixes or the prefixes, you can just use an Omen of Sinistral or Dextral Annulment and you will remove those modifiers. These ones are super popular on jewels, and I think people are a little bit more familiar with those ones, but not that many people I've seen actually use these ones. But again, these high value omens, a lot of the times it's only worth it to use a couple of them. Use maybe 1 or 2, 3 or 4, depending if they're cheap early in the league. And then whatever you get, you kind of just settle for it and then you make it work. That's pretty much all for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm just going to corrupt these. Hopefully we win on the way out. If not, it is what it is. Let me know in the comments what you guys want to see next. Take it easy, Exiles. And we lost.